welcome back. And we're moving into our first conversation for this morning with representatives of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We're talking about the Belize, Guatemala referendum and other issues related to it, of course. And we have with us on set Chief Executive Officer of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Pat Andrews, and Belize's Ambassador to Guatemala, Ambassador Alexis Rosado. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Let's begin. I know you did this on Friday morning during the press brief, but I want to give you the opportunity once again to share with our viewers this morning the transition from being the former ambassador to Washington to now being the Chief Executive Officer for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Thank you, Isani. Well, I think the transition has been very smooth. My 2 years in Washington were pretty good years, filled with lots of events and situations that relate to Belize. At the OAS and with the State Department, I think that we were able to deepen relationships on that side. With CARICOM and SICA, also very good opportunities to be able to tell our story, the Belize story. So from that standpoint, I think that it kind of prepared me for what was going to come about here in Belize. I didn't know about this job, so I thought that 2 years up in Washington was good enough. But when I was approached about the job, I readily wanted to accept it too, because I thought it would have given me a good opportunity to continue to serve the public. And to be frank with you, I'm very convinced that having joined MFA, I can sense that we have some good people, committed people, people who work assiduously to foster and to bring forward Belize's foreign policy. So I'm very excited. Private sector was good, but public sector has its own merits, which I am sucking in. So I look forward to continue to serve.
Mm-hmm.
This succeeds a very lengthy career in the private sector. When I listened and heard your story insofar as wanted to serve in a public capacity before, and the transition that you made to banking, and now you're finding your calling in once again coming back into public service and being able to give back to the country in that manner. What has that been like for you when you look at that timeline, so to speak?
Well, you know, when I first had a little taste of public service, it would have been in March of 1973, a long time ago. I had just returned from studying abroad, and I had majored in economics and minored in finance, so I thought I was just destined to do my thing with government. It didn't work with that way, but it led me to understand that serving people, it didn't have to necessarily be initially the public service. It could have been through private sector. And so the 42 years I worked for Scotiabank, I think gave me a little chance also to work with people and to be able to elevate their lives, to be able to help them to build careers and build businesses and so on. So in effect, it made me feel good. I think all of that experience has helped me to look at things a bit different. And I come from a family that has been involved with public service, so I think it runs in the blood.
Yeah. So, of course, your time spent in Washington, you actually dove into the deep end of the pool, we have to say that. And especially given the context of the change of government within Guatemala. You know, I think for people who've been following this issue for years and far beyond my birth, I have to say this much. When President Jimmy Morales was elected, within his campaign, we started to see that the Belize-Guatemala issue was going to be a part of his own mandate, and he seems to be following through with that. And I want to give both of you a chance to reflect on what this shows in terms of what the political will of those in charge in Guatemala means for us here in Belize in terms of our response and preparedness in dealing with this issue?
Well, from my standpoint, I believe that the timeline you just talked about would have seen me smack up in Washington. I believe that the various incidents that we had that occurred during that time were very critical to Belize. I remember spending some long weekends with Belize on the phone, trying to look for solutions, trying to see how we could continue ensuring that the people in Belize could sleep well at night, knowing that we were looking after their interests. Issues which I think, in hindsight, were very unfortunate, including the incident with the young chap Alvarado. But those are the risks that we run living in that situation where we live, with Guatemala making their claim against us and we not being able to resolve this situation as yet. We always run the risk of these incursions and these incidents. So again, I think that from my standpoint, and knowing Guatemala with their immense resource and army and so on, I believe that the 2 years and maybe the part of the 2 years that I lived through all this showed me that Belize, we can take care of business also. The ambassadors and the governments, I would say both governments over the years have been able to use smart diplomacy to get us to where we are. And there's still work to be done, and huge amount of work to be done. But it's in that spirit that we're going to be confronting it down the road.
Perspective?
Well, just to add as part of the response to your question, Marlene, that the situation in Guatemala has been changing to some extent, and to a large extent in respect of their claim on Belize. You will recall that for many years the question of Belize in Guatemala was seen by many as a ruse, some kind of distraction. Whenever they had political difficulties internally, then Belize would come up, and the whole slogan that went along with it was something that was familiar to us in this country. Since they arrived at their new constitution in 1985 and democratic governance started coming back into Guatemala, even though the Belize question remained, it's a part of their constitution, and it's something that requires them to do whatever they can to resolve it. The fact is that over time, I've been witnessing that the elites in that society have been moving toward the conclusion that it has to be resolved, and it's no longer seen so much as a political football that the parties used to use from time to time to declare that one is more patriotic than the other. We would have seen from the votes in Congress, for example, last week, that overwhelmingly they voted in favor of having the referendum to go to the ICJ in accordance with the special agreement that they signed with us in 2008 and its protocol of 2015. The Umbrella Chamber of Commerce, what they call the CACIF, it's the representative of all the major industries and agriculture and different sectors that are represented. A very powerful body in Guatemala came up with a press release and a public declaration stating that they welcome the position adopted by the government and adopted by Congress to call on this referendum, because they feel the need to, in their mind, finally settle the border, and in their mind be able to benefit and take advantages of better relations with all their neighbors, including Belize. I don't think there's any question that there have been a lot of missed opportunities. Our integration with Central America was something that never occurred until we joined SICA in 2000. So there's a lot of missed opportunities that they are seeing that they want to get over with this thing about the dispute and move on.
When you look at the fact that the Congress voted in majority to proceed with the referendum, you are looking at two possible scenarios here. One where they would need the financial resources to go about with the process, and the other, which also involves financial resources and the expense of it, the public awareness campaign. And the same holds true for Belize, for instance. If we are to proceed, we need to be able to have the necessary amounts of monies for the exercise to be done, as well as the public awareness campaign that goes along with it.
Yes, yes.
Now, you mentioned that Guatemala has essentially admitted that it is having financial difficulties with the education campaign aspect. Would you mind elaborating on that a bit?
Well, they had already budgeted for this year the holding of a public consultation, a referendum, which that part is budgeted. They did not have budgeted that they would hold a referendum on going to the ICJ for their claim on Belize. So that is the part that requires them to get resources in order to be able to conduct this public awareness, public education. And whereas they might have some, they do not have sufficiently, from what I understand.
Now, Ambassador, in your role, one of the things that we have looked forward to is to hear your perspective on what is truly taking place on the ground in Guatemala. And oftentimes, when a particular issue takes place, whether it's an incident or perhaps a declaration by the foreign minister of Guatemala or the president of Guatemala, Belizeans react, and we know this is an extremely emotional issue for us. Now, it is not always met by the very same reaction in Guatemala. And I want to ask you, looking at how you have explained earlier, where we have seen the Guatemalan government prioritize the settling of this claim, is the public on board? Are they still seeing this as a deflection from the real social problems that they're facing, or are they genuinely interested in being able to follow through what is necessary to settle the claim?
Well, Guatemala internally, they have a lot of difficulties, a lot of challenges, developmental problems that they have to be grappling with. A problem of governance is a serious concern over there. They have the United Nations presidents as part of what they call CICIG, which is the commission that is investigating corruption and so forth. And they have their hands full when it comes to that. So the priorities in respect of what the general population might be thinking of, I think it is fair to say that many are not thinking about Belize or recovering Belize, or the whole old slogan about Belize es nuestro is no longer foremost on their minds. They're thinking about anti-corruption campaigns, improving their lives and their livelihoods generally. Crime, the crime rates can be very high. So they have many other priorities to that of resolving their claim on Belize. But the question of Belize remains in their constitution. It is a fact that until such time as they resolve their claim on Belize, they will not be able, from their line of thinking, they will not be able to have a defined and demarcated border on their northeastern side of their territory. Whereas for us that is already defined and clear, and it's already written in the 1859 treaty. They have a different mentality. They don't recognize the 1859 treaty. And that is where they feel the need to resolve this once and for all. And since they already have something budgeted for it, then they're just following through in what previous administrations had committed to.
Very key to mention when we're looking at the referendum being held in Guatemala is looking at what their laws allow for a legitimate decision by the people. And it is very different from what we have in Belize. Let's discuss that for a bit. Essentially, they need a simple majority of those who come out to vote.
Yes.
That's the case.
Right.
All right. Now, given the fact that this is a part of the everyday education for a Guatemalan, one can make an assumption that they will vote yes to going to the ICJ.
I would not be too sure, you know.
Yeah.
We should not take it for
Well,
granted.
see, I'm trying to understand what's happening on the ground. I think if I know that in Guatemala we hear Belize is for us, and that it is a part of my childhood education right into adulthood, and you're now asking me whether or not we should settle this claim, I'm saying us non-diplomats may assume that they would vote in favor of. And since there's no requisite number of voters to come out, if you have a quarter of the population come out and the majority says yes, then that is a yes for Guatemala to proceed to the ICJ, right? So I'm asking you, if the people on the ground, from your sense, from your own interactions with people within Guatemala, do you feel that there is a strong possibility that Guatemalans will vote yes to going to the ICJ?
There is a strong possibility, should they conduct a public awareness campaign that is objective and with sufficient coverage. They have a large territory to cover. So it's not an easy task that they have at hand. But clearly that the fact that they are calling for such a referendum, I don't think they would risk getting a no vote so easily. I think the conditions are such that people want to finally resolve this, get it behind them, remove the possibility of future leaders to be using the same issue as a distraction again.
Where does Belize stand in light of the recent developments in Guatemala? Where do we go now in terms of dealing with this issue and preparing from our end?
What recent developments?
With
the calling
Congress,
of the referendum?
Where do we stand now? What is in our immediate timeline?
Well, it puts our CEO in a difficult task that he has to find a way of making sure that we are
prepared. And we are, rest assured, it's not by accident that that Ambassador Rosado is in Belize. We're here this week to brainstorm, to put a paper together for cabinet, for the Prime Minister to look at, that will give a clear path to certain strategies that we need to move towards. We had done this in 2013 when we were close to a referendum then. So it's a matter of revisiting that strategy. But we have to have our principals take another look at it for changing circumstances. But indeed, it will be an all-out effort. And during this time, not only will it be work that we'll be doing behind the scene, but we'll be reaching out to people like yourselves to help us, because we will need to be able to tell the story. And just like you have alluded to, that Guatemala has been doing this consistently for years, we have to catch up. And I think that with the public awareness that the minister has been doing, and we and our team have been doing, we're going to accelerate that and then be able to move consistently up to the next level, because it's going to be lots of work.
The Prime Minister has gone on record to say that essentially the referendum for Belize won't be held anytime before 2018. Given the timeline that he said it would happen after the re-registration exercise, and the re-registration exercise has been clearly stated that it won't happen until after the municipal elections. So at the earliest, and it could even be later, we're looking at a referendum date possibly in 2018, 2019?
It would seem so. If you look at what the Prime Minister has said and you go from that, it would look like 2018, early 2019.
Now you have been strategizing, obviously, and I want to ask whether or not you are of the opinion that it is a better decision for Belize to hold its referendum closer to the date that Guatemala does so, or to simply wait until you feel that the Belizean citizenry is prepared to make that decision?
Well, the Belizean citizenry has to be prepared for any eventuality. So it is the duty of the government, to the extent possible, to make sure that the citizenry is fully informed about the subject. So in a sense, it's good news that we have more time. In a sense, it is concerning that we seem to be postponing a final decision. Every time we have to wait longer, the longer the dispute takes to be settled. So
it is no longer compulsory, based on the initial agreement, that we will be holding simultaneous referenda, correct? So
That's
it's
right.
whenever we are prepared, whenever we reach that point in time, so to speak, that we would proceed on our own with having our referendum.
that's right. That's right. That's right.
Yeah. That was a part of the amendment that was made to the special.
I think you were there
Yeah,
when
we
we
were there
signed
for the
that. Yes,
signing.
yes.
Now, the original date for the referendum obviously was changed, and at one point Guatemala was indicating that they would have held their referendum along with the runoff elections. That never took place. So it is no different what has been taking place in the countries in terms of postponing the date of the referendum. From what you have seen, and specifically with the decision made last week, do you see a more definitive path for Guatemala to move to a referendum, and how soon does it seem to be?
Yes, I think we have to take it seriously. I do not foresee that there will be any major shifts or any occurrences that might change the trajectory that the Congress has set out from last week. I foresee that before the end of this year, they should be able to hold a referendum. The Congress said that they needed between 90 days to 6 months after they have been given the go-ahead. And the executive, the government, has said that they would wish for it to be done this year. I think if we put both of them together, we could expect anywhere between now and December for something to be held.
Yeah. Now, how does that change the strategies that have been in place in Belize? There has been a referendum unit that has been focusing on public education. There have been quite a number of incidents that have riled the Belizean public on the Belize-Guatemala issue again, and we do have to take some time to talk about what's happening in the Sarstoon and what's happening in the Chiquibol. But if Guatemala moves to a referendum before the end of the year, and they vote yes to going to the ICJ, that changes even the starting point for your education campaign in Belize. What is the strategy to be able to address that?
Well, it changes it or it intensifies the reasons why we have to continue to focus and underline the importance of awareness. We have no turning back. We have no turning back. We're reaching now at a stage where it's a defining moment. If they go and they vote yes, our message will have to be one that we have been maintaining, that we have to convince our people that yes is the option. We've tried everything else. We've tried negotiations, we've tried facilitation, everything. So we have to go to the ICJ to get a resolution. So it will intensify it. And as I mentioned before, all people will have to be rowing in the same direction for us to be able to accomplish it.
Yeah, when I listen to what needs to be done on both sides of this particular issue, it's a long way ahead. And the workload is seemingly difficult and challenging in terms of getting everyone on board. If you look at the geographic size or magnitude of Guatemala versus small little Belize, it would seem as if though they have more cut out for them in terms of trying to educate their entire populace versus Belize with only 360 some odd thousand people. But nonetheless, the work needs to continue. And the idea of the referendum unit that has been working assiduously in its own way to raise that awareness on a day-to-day basis, with Ambassador Stuart Leslie, for instance.
Right.
we don't necessarily get to see him on a regular basis, but we know that the job is ongoing because more and more you talk to Belizeans, the more you realize that to a great extent we are informed of what is taking place, either locally or with what is happening across the border. Where do you see the education campaign going insofar as the months ahead, for instance?
Well, that is yet to be decided in terms of how we are placing ourselves given the new situation. But I think it is important that we note that whenever there's an incident happening, I know a knee-jerk reaction is, well, we don't want to deal with our neighbor, and we don't want to talk about the ICJ. In fact, I would wish that the contrary is true, because what incidents on the ground prove to us, there is a need to resolve this dispute. I don't think it could be clearer than that. But I understand the reaction and the sentiments by many to say, well, we won't not deal with it.
Let me introduce a question there, because I think it's a very valid point. When there's an incident that takes place, when we hear about a fisherman being stopped in the Sarthoon or military personnel being trailed by Guatemalans, it really angers, and I say anger because that's what it is. It angers the Belizean public. Now, in your roles as ambassadors, as the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I believe a part of the criticism that has been hurled on the ministry is really that there is a diplomatic role that is being taken. But I believe that the Belizean public calls for some sort of balance between your diplomatic path and taking action or taking a firm stance on our sovereignty. And CEO, I'd love for you to be able to speak about that, because that is something I think that will continuously be a part of the conversation from this point. I don't know until when, until we have this matter settled.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it has to be, and that's a very, very good point, Marlene. The truth of the matter is that one of our principal goals is to take care of Belize's sovereignty. And indeed, when incidents occur and so on, even when we're using diplomacy to try to sort it out and so on, there is a process that we have to be following also. If there are incursions, if there are things that are being done contrary to the CBMs, we have to document it, because that documentation is part of what we're going to be using for down the road when we go to the ICJ.
Yeah.
And to be very frank with you, we talk about a timeline, and the timeline that we're talking about would be getting both countries to the point of having the referenda. But beyond that, when we go to the ICJ, we will continue to be neighbors with Guatemala. And so incidents will continue, so we will have to be there constantly, trying to see how we can take care of our people and our sovereignty and our borders and so on. We will have to be very vigilant.
Yeah.
Very vigilant.
Now, what has the discussion been like with Guatemala regarding the incursions and the challenges in the Sarthoon? Just last week, the Friends for Conservation and Development reported once again that they've caught gold panners in the Chiquibul. They are raising the flag continuously and consistently, that they have seen establishments that seem to be set up for cattle ranching, which they know, based on the experience in Mexico, is a starting point for organized criminal elements to set up within that area, and they're very concerned about it. They don't have the manpower to be able to address something like this. In the Sarthoon, even the media and others have been going in frequently to see if there has been any change in terms of the Guatemalans exerting their control over the area, and we still see and hear of issues there. So I want to ask you, what is the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, what is the government doing in engaging Guatemala to ensure that we can see some kind of change or impact within these areas, these vulnerable areas, with the problems that we've been seeing?
Well, let me just say that we should not be too surprised when we hear that these things are happening, because they have been happening for years, for decades, and what is happening is that it's just getting worse, and it will keep getting worse That is part of the reason why we're recommending to the people we need to resolve this matter as early as possible. And the only way we have found moving forward, given all the attempts that have made in the past, is to take it to the ICJ to get it resolved once and for all. But in respect of all the activities taking place, we will keep hearing about them. There are two levels of intervention by the government of Belize. One is people who are on the ground. You have the BDF, you have the forest rangers, you have the FCD, various NGOs that are along our side of the border. They all cooperate with an interagency team. So police, BDF, forestry, immigration, you name it, they do patrols. Foreign affairs comes in at another level.
Yes.
So we don't send our officers on the ground to patrol the border. So they inform us about what they're seeing, and we try to deal with our neighbor to the extent that is possible, bearing in mind that our relations are not at its level best. So it makes cooperation difficult. A few years ago, I went to Guatemala. I was still the CEO then. We took a team led by me as the Belize commissioner. We took our intelligence people, our police, BDF, I think immigration, special branch went, met with their counterparts over there, and they agreed that they would conduct some kind of increased cooperation, collaboration in terms of intelligence gathering, in terms of prosecuting people and so forth. But relationships at that level are difficult because we don't have the relationship that we have, say, with Mexico. And even as much as we try, every now and then we would start, but then it would stop. So we have many stopgap measures, and there's no continuity, and we have to start because the people are changed on their side especially. So it makes it difficult. The criminal elements who see that we're not talking, who see that we don't have the cooperation that we ought to have, take advantage of it. The problem of deforestation is not something that only occurs between Belize and Guatemala. It occurs even within Guatemala. Petén has lost at least half of their forests over the last couple of decades. So it's not unique to just the border situation of Belize, Guatemala. That's not to give an excuse, but I'm just saying that the criminal elements will take advantage and will continue taking advantage of the situation that we have between ourselves. So what we need is to cooperate more. Our BDF to have more patrols, coordinated patrols with the Guatemalan armed forces, and they do. They meet every month to coordinate their patrols. But there's much more that needs to be done. We need to have intelligence sharing, intelligence gathering. We need their forestry people to cooperate more with our forestry people, not just in a formalistic manner, but as a matter of habit. Be able to pick up the phone and say, look, something is happening now, let's deal with it. Rather than having to write a memo or a diplomatic note, it takes forever to deal it.
As small as Belize is in terms of its border with Guatemala, when you look at both countries side by side, you're still dealing with a huge swath of land to cover by any stretch for patrols or what have you. So the idea of, for instance, a new outpost being established in the Chiquibull, where rangers as well as BDF soldiers on patrol would be able to maintain a presence in that area, does help. But it's like you're saying, a lot more needs to be done in terms of intelligence and information gathering. When you look at the movement of these individuals, it is clear that they study exactly what Belize and our organizations are doing in terms of movement in and out of the Chiquibull, for them to be able to, let's say for instance, plan how they come into Belize and extract gold, shate, and whatever other resources that they are plundering from our end. Tell me something. from the diplomatic perspective, you guys are doing your part in terms of being able to raise awareness of what is taking place in the Chiquibo. From the perspective of those on the ground, they're also doing their best. What else can be done in terms of being able to address and arrest this situation?
You just heard, thank you very much, you just heard Ambassador Rosado talk a little bit about it, what we are doing, like for example with the NGOs, with FCD, with the military and so on. On the multilateral side, with the OAS, with the State Department, we have been and will continue to keep them apprised of those situations, because by reaching out to the group of friends like the US, Canada, Mexico, and many other countries, the EU, we keep them informed of that too. And we're hoping, and I think that there has been some indication that personal suasion can be used to try to minimize these incidents. We have definitely to keep our ears to the ground, though, because it'll be a recurrent situation. The truth of the matter is that the Guatemalans on the border, they're looking for economic sustenance.
Yeah.
So they'll come over. We will have to try and see what can happen with the help of our group of friends to keep them occupied at the border. And the OAS has to be there to play a key role in keeping them within that area. So we will continue to work.
Now, there's so many layers to this particular issue, and obviously nobody knows that better than you gentlemen. But when you speak about the OAS, for example, we know that there have been challenges in terms of raising finances for the office at the adjacency zone to remain open. And part of the reasons we have heard is that the Friends of Belize, those who are providing the funding, are saying, we've been doing this long enough, let's move towards a resolution. So it adds even more fuel as to why the argument for voting yes to go to the ICJ is important in our country. Now, how have we been doing, one, in being able to establish the necessary funds? You speak about the willingness of OAS to continue to work with us, but the finance is important.
Yeah.
And the finance has to come from your lobbying efforts with these other countries to tell them that we do need assistance in protecting our border.
Yeah.
Yep. There is a sense of urgency. There is a sense of urgency. We can't continue doing this here year after year, because indeed these people are asking us, well, what's going to happen next? So to be frank with you, I think that what we've seen in the past few weeks and so on, with this fast tracking of what's happening in Guatemala and what we need to do here, that's, I think, part of what they wanted to see, a little bit of action there. So we will just be going down that road, and as mentioned by both of us, we have to continue to work hard at it.
Should mention the EU just signed off on their
1.4. Yeah, the EU, for example, just signed off on their 1.4 million euros, which again is for the adjacent zone.
Yeah.
We will continue to work closely with them, with the OAS, and I think that'll be part of it. Yeah.
Can I segue just prior to wrapping up this conversation with you guys to another topic quickly? The issue of Taiwan and the grant, and of course the reaction from the Taiwanese ambassador. I'm not sure if you guys were able to see in the first part of the show a very candid and open response from the Taiwanese ambassador in respect of the grants and what had been requested by both governments. Can we get firstly a reaction from you guys insofar as what you've seen from the Taiwanese ambassador?
Well, yes, I saw the interview. Belize and Taiwan are friends, and they have been friends for a long, long time. And they assist Belize quite a bit over the many years. I believe that when one talks about quantum, this is, I guess, what has been raised with Guatemala on one side, Belize on the other side. We are of the view that basically the discussions that were held with the foreign minister were at a certain level. We knew what our needs were, and it has to be at their certain levels at a point in time when they're discussing this. Taiwan knows what we need, and I'm sure that at the end of the day, they won't be wanting to treat Belize worse off than Guatemala is treated. So that at this point in time is as best as I can put perspective on the situation. We'll see what happens in the next few days and weeks.
Okay. So, gentlemen, what would you like to tell for people who are watching, people who have been monitoring the situation? They hear of the decision made by Guatemala. They hear you openly express that there is a possibility that by the end of the year, Guatemala will go to the polls to decide on their path to the ICJ. What do you want the Belizean public to know as to what we're doing and our level of preparedness to be able to progress on settling the claim? Closing point.
Well, the decision as to when a referendum will be held in Belize will be up to Cabinet.
That's right.
So I don't think the CEO or I are in a position to talk about timeline. But what we have to make sure of is that we use the opportunity we have to make sure that the Belizean citizenry is as fully informed as possible about the issue, so that when they are called upon to vote in a referendum, they will be able to do so with a full knowledge of the implications of it. The next point is that in the meantime, what we have to do is to be sure that all arrangements are in place with our international lawyers, with our research, with our documentation, to make sure that should the Belizean people decide yes, then we will have all the necessary material for us to be able to put our best foot forward, our best face forward in a court of law, because we believe that when you go to court, you will be in a level playing field. It's not like they have an army right now of 15,000 people and we have a BDF of 1,000. Over there we'll have lawyers, a team of lawyers, and we will have equal parity. And what we'll have to do is to make sure we have the best lawyers and the best evidence to be able to defend Belize as best we can. And I think the Belizean people need to know that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has been working in that area for years now, not just something new. And we are continuing to do so. In fact, this week we have one of our international lawyers visiting us, and we will be able to hold full discussions to plan ahead in this respect.
That's right. And along the way, we'll keep you informed, because that's the purpose of the whole story, to keep you informed, to keep the Belize public informed. Because once we have that, and once we have the Belize population behind us, we will win.
All right. Thank you for stopping in. We appreciate you having this conversation with us and your promise to keep us updated as well. Right?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to go
Good
ahead and
morning,
take
Belize.
a break, and when we come back, we'll be joined by the Ministry of Health talking about new mechanisms being put in place to prevent and treat cervical cancer. So stay tuned.